And we're at 5 p.m. Hey everybody, and welcome to our panel, Litterbox Hoax 2, Legislature, Boogaloo. Here's what it's going to be about. Starting in 2023, U.S. conservatives proposed anti-transgender laws, which also target people for identifying as animals. This came from an urban legend that satirized transgender restroom access by falsely claiming that schools were also offering litter boxes to accommodate furry students. Join our trio of community historians as we take a deeper look into each of these bills. So, introductions. Hi, I'm Paige. My pronouns are he, they. I'm a canine Folkenterra, and I'm part of a 5-person draconic system. I'm the author of the Alter-Human Comics Shenanigans and the tabletop role-playing games A Wolf in Man's Clothing and Ancient Dragon Hidden Townsfolk. I'm the co-owner of the Non-Human National Park Forum, and I conducted the 2021 Non-Humanity and Body Modification/Decoration Survey and the 2022 Abnormal Instinct Survey. You might recognize me because I was a lecturer at OtherCon 2021 and 2022.
Hi, I'm Orion Scribner, a dragon otherkin. I'm the author of a comic about therianthropes and otherkin called Theri There, and the community history book Otherkin Timeline. Both of these have been cited in academic articles. Like my partners, Page and Chimeras, I'm transgender. We all lectured together before at OtherCon 2022.
Hello, we are House of Chimeras. We are a large, multiple system of non-humans and therans. Our systems collectively use the they-them pronouns. We are the author of A Timeline of the Theran Community and academic publications, non-academic publications, media, art, and fiction related to non-humanity, among other writings. And we have previously hosted 6 panels at OtherCon, and our system includes a phytanthrope who coined the term phytanthropy and phytanthrope.
Unmuting myself. Now, before we begin, we have a disclaimer to make. We are not lawyers or physicians. By proceeding to listen to or participate in this panel, you agree that any information here does not constitute legal or medical advice. You must consult with a lawyer or physician to obtain legal or medical advice. You claim full responsibility for what you do. This panel does not advocate for or allow in-depth discussion of illegal activities. The creators of this panel shall not be liable for any damages, prosecutions, or proceedings instituted against any person or entity as a result of the use of information from this panel or any loss, injury, or damage caused thereby.
Content warnings. We have some content warnings for this lecture. We will go into some depth about discrimination against transgender people in the form of violation of civil rights.
We will also describe opposition to people who behave like or identify as non-human animals or who wear animal costumes. The legislators in question refer to these as furries or as transspecies people.
Please know before we begin that this panel and its contents will be recorded and publicly posted on YouTube. Everything that you type or post in the Discord chat can be seen in the videos of this panel, so please keep things appropriately PG-13 and don't talk about anything illegal or that you don't want to put out there in public.
This panel is a sequel to our previous panel from last year, Litter Boxes in the School Bathrooms, discussing the right's current moral panic. We will be discussing several anti-transgender bills proposed by the U.S. conservatives in 2023, which also target people behaving or identifying as animals. Several years ago, right-wingers started propagating the urban myth that high schools were supplying litter boxes in student bathrooms for furries, or of students being allowed to opt out of speaking and only respond to instructors in animal noises. This was intended to criticize schools for allowing transgender students to use the bathroom of their choice and for asserting their pronoun preferences. These myths and offshoots of them were completely made up and were publicly debunked multiple times, but they continued to circulate in conservative circles and gain momentum. Eventually, these myths gained the attention of Republican politicians and lawmakers. Even though it was evidently untrue and has been proven to be untrue multiple times. In 2022, the fabrication was brought up by politicians in opposition to and in comparison to transgender rights. In one case, two separate Republican Missouri senators, Mike Moon and Danny Hopkins, echoed the hoax talking points in the Missouri State Senate, where it was also claimed that people were getting the idea to identify as non-human animals as a slippery slope for preferred pronouns. A candidate for the Georgia Republican primary, Candace Taylor, referenced the myth in her Twitter and within her campaign plans when she proclaimed that upon her election, she would sign an exclusive order enforcing dress codes differentiated by apparent sex and banning any furry-related items from being worn. In Minnesota, 3 Republicans, Tim Miller, Steve Duskowski, and Eric Macaro, brought up the hoax when they directly criticized transgender people. These aren't the only occasions of politicians bringing up the myth for their own ends in 2022. Just a few relevant examples. In 2023, this escalated into conservatives bringing up multiple bills that opposed transgender rights, which also used language that opposed furries and trans-species people. A move which is likely inspired by the litter box hoax. You may have heard that some of these bills being discussed in the ultra-human community or other generally online already. In this panel, we'll be going in depth to several of such bills that have been proposed, what they have changed or prohibited, and where we are now.
Before we talk about those few bills, we have to talk about we have to talk about the greater context in which they appeared, within a huge wave of anti-transgender bills. During the first half of this year, more than 500 bills were introduced in the United States to oppose the rights of transgender people and anyone else who is gender non-conforming. This map comes from the blog of Erin Reed, a journalist and historian. We highly recommend her blog at erinninthemorning.com. This map shows all of the proposed or passed legislation related to trans rights from this year up until the latest time she updated it in June. The color code for her map puts states that are safer as more blue, whereas states that have more risk of anti-trans legislation are in red. You can see that the West Coast and northeastern states generally have laws that protect trans people, or at least aren't so actively dangerous. Meanwhile, anti-trans bills are turning up in most of the rest of the country. Florida is the darkest red because it's getting the worst anti-trans legislature of the whole country, so Reed warns it's so dangerous that most people shouldn't even visit there. These anti-trans bills take various tactics, and they can also hurt people who aren't trans. Many of these tactics are reinventions of old ones that conservatives had used in previous decades to oppose gay rights. Some bills would attack our access to health care or force us to stop our transitions. Some bills would limit how old a young adult needs to be before they're allowed to transition, while other bills would ban transition for everyone. Bathroom bills would make it a crime to use a restroom that doesn't match your gender assigned at birth. This tends to lead to suspicion and harassment of more than just trans people. Drag bans would prohibit public performers from wearing clothes that don't match their gender assigned at birth. The vague wording in most drag bans would prohibit a lot more, many kinds of stage performance, and the clothes anyone wears in everyday public settings. Some could make it a crime for women to wear blue jeans instead of skirts, which was the situation in the US a few decades ago. Some Don't Say Gay bills limit what students and teachers are allowed to talk about, have books about, or wear in schools. Those bills tend to prohibit mention of people who are LGBT, as well as education about sexual health in general, leaving youth uninformed about the dangers of sexual abusers, sexually transmitted infections, and unintended pregnancies. Generally, whatever targets one group of people can be harmful to so many more of us. That's part of why solidarity for everyone's rights is important.
At least 4 anti-transgender bills have also targeted furries and people who identify as animals. On this map we have made, you can see each one came from a different state: North Dakota, Oklahoma, Indiana, and Montana. We're going to look at each of them in more detail later on this lecture. In short, they are North Dakota Bill 1522, which would prohibit schools from supporting transgender youth, and, in an earlier draft, students identifying as animals. It has passed into law. Oklahoma Senate's Bill 943, which would prohibit school employees from teaching about LGBT people and being furries. This bill is still in progress and isn't a law yet. Indiana State House Bill 380, which has context saying that it is meant to interpret furries and transgender students as distractions in school and how they dress. It has passed into law. Montana State Bill 544 for censoring adult content on the internet. It has passed into law. A rejected amendment would have also censored content about transgender and transspecies people.
A state bill is a proposed law that has to go through many steps before it actually becomes a law or it dies. First, a representative writes a bill. After it's written, they work to get the bill sponsored and get it the support of other representatives. Once sponsored, it can go to committee to be researched, reviewed, and revised as needed. Amendments may be offered to fix any outstanding issues on the bill, with committee members voting on accepting or rejecting these changes. After the committee approves the bill, it goes to be debated and voted on in the House of Representatives or the Senate. During this period, politicians may advocate for further changes to be made. If the bill is approved within the House or the Senate, the process begins anew from committee within whichever legislative house it has not yet passed through. So in other words, if it passes in the House, then it will move on to committee under the House of Representatives, and it will eventually be brought to the floor of the House of Representatives for debate, and vice versa. If the second legislative house makes further amendments to the bill, then it has to be sent back to its original legislative house to be voted on and accepted once again. If the Senate and the House of Representatives cannot agree on what changes should be made to it, then a two-house conference committee will be called to create a finalized version. This version of the bill will then go to both legislative houses to be approved or rejected. If the bill manages to get through both the Senate and the House, it will be given to the governor to sign into law or to veto. Bills are not guaranteed to become laws, and many don't. Bills can die at pretty much every stage of the lawmaking process. So, how do bills die? A bill can expire if it's tabled by a committee for too long. Any bill not enacted in the 2-year period before the Congress adjourns for the next congressional election is considered dead, and it must be reintroduced and start the process all over from the beginning. A bill can also be outright rejected by a committee and killed before it reaches either the House of Representatives or the Senate. The bill can also be killed on the House floor and within the Senate, depending on if the bill has enough support to continue to move forward. And if one of the two legislative bodies does not approve the bill, then it will just not pass on to become a law. Even if both bodies move it forward, the governor can still potentially veto and kill a bill. Veto power differs by state. Some governors may be able to veto specific aspects of amendments, or veto specific lines of text within the bill. However, all states give their legislatures the ability to override the governor's veto power, though the amount needed to override kind of differs from state to state. You can help kill bad bills too! Ordinary people like you can make your voice heard at the public hearing for any bill on the floor. You can submit a written testimony ahead and go to the hearing in person to testify. Look up how to provide legislative testimony, and you'll find videos and guidance on the rules for how to do this in your specific region.
Let's look at each of the anti-furry bills now, starting with one from North Dakota. For anyone in our audience who isn't familiar with U.S. geography, the map in the corner of this slide shows the location of that state, neighboring the Canada border. North Dakota House Bill 1522 would prohibit school boards and teachers from a variety of actions supporting transgender students. It says that schools and other government entities can't adopt policies requiring or prohibiting people from using a trans person's preferred pronouns. It prohibits transgender students from using restrooms that align with their gender identity. It also prohibits schools from concealing a student's transgender status from their parents. When the bill was introduced in January 2023, it also had a line that would prohibit school boards and teachers from accommodating a student's perception of being a non-human animal. The portion about being other than human was visible only in the draft of this bill as it was introduced, and was deleted before the bill passed on May 15. It will be an anti-transgender law, though, and it could put transgender students in danger of assault and abuse. These anti-furry bills really are not that funny in actual practice. In the US, state laws have to abide by and not conflict with federal laws. This North Dakota law might conflict with some previously established federal laws about free speech and expression, as well as restroom access for transgender students. This shows the portion of the old draft of the bill that mentioned being an animal. It was on page 1 at section 1, subsection 2, subsection C. It says that a board or a teacher in a public or private school may not adopt a policy establishing or providing a place, facility, school program, or accommodation that caters to a student's perception of being any animal species other than human. This is a reference to the litter box hoax. This line was in the bill as it was introduced, but it was deleted before it passed into law.
Let's look at a bill from Oklahoma, which, as you can see on the map, is a southern state. Introduced in January 2023, Oklahoma Senate Bill 943 explicitly opposes transgender rights, and also specifically mentions furry. The bill would potentially affect eligible students who are described in the bill as being someone who is a resident of the state, who is eligible to enroll in public school, who either lives in or has a guardian who works in a county with a population of 10,000 or more, or who lives in a trigger district. Trigger district, notably, includes any district with a school employee or volunteer who happens to be a furry, and any district which has taught about gender identity and sexual orientation. This is among other additional potential factors that can result in something being labeled a trigger district, like, for example, disparaging the oil industry. When we looked at this bill again in August, it hadn't been voted on yet and was still at 25% progression, so it's not close to passing into a law yet.
The part of the bill that refers to furries is on page 7 at section 2, subsection A, subsection 10, subsection G. The bill itself says, trigger district means a school district in this state where any of the following concepts or activities has been advocated or tolerated. Instruction in gender identity and sexual orientation, including instruction designed to promote gender confusion, or the presence of any school employee or volunteer engaged in anthropomorphic behavior commonly referred to as furries. The wording of this is strange because anthropomorphic technically doesn't mean animal-like, it means human-like. You can tell they meant animal-like, but this bill is accidentally saying that people aren't allowed to act like humans. Participants of the furry fandom do refer to fictional, human-like animal characters as being anthropomorphic.
Now we'll move on to a bill from Indiana, which is an eastern state below the Great Lakes. This bill from January 2023 is Indiana State House Bill 380. This bill is about enforcing dress codes to prevent disruptive attire in school. We can read between the lines to find the genuine purpose, interpreting gender-affirming clothing as disruption. Senator Ratz, who wrote this bill, claimed that it's meant to prevent students from wearing furry costumes, fursuits, to school. The schools there say they haven't had any students who do that. The bill passed on May 4, with the wording about disruptive attire changed to say that schools are allowed to have policies that prohibit distractive attire. This next slide shows the relevant excerpt from the bill, Section 4, subsection D, on page 2. It says, a school corporation may adopt a policy concerning student dress code or distractive behavior. Here's some context for this bill in particular. In the US, most people from about the ages of 5 to 18 go to public schools, which are tax-funded government establishments. A landmark case about the rights of these students was Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District in 1969. In this case, a school had punished some students for being disruptive by wearing black armbands in silent protest of the Vietnam War. However, the court decided that this was an example of the very kinds of speech the First Amendment means to protect, such as the right to peaceful protest. U.S. government establishments that try to suppress peaceful protest are way out of line. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects all people's free speech and expression, not just citizens, and not just adults. When the court decides in a certain way, that sets a precedent that other cases after it must go along with that decision too. This case set the precedent that clothing and accessories count as symbolic speech, that the Constitution protects the free speech of students of public schools, and many other kinds of civil rights of young students. Public schools only have the right to stop students from dressing a certain way if it is materially or substantially disruptive to school, or if it violates the rights of others. It has to be something that makes way more trouble than those black armbands. Is that why the Indiana bill's wording changed to distractive, so that it can try to control attire that doesn't count as disruptive? Think back. When have you seen schools punish students for wearing clothes or accessories that they say are distracting to others? Did it actually distract any students from their schoolwork? Have you noticed if the dress codes are set up to unfairly punish girls, transgender students, people of color, and other marginalized peoples for harmless stuff by saying it's distracting to others?
The last bill we'll look at today is from Montana, which is a state neighboring the Canada border. Montana State Bill 544 is a bill from the state of Montana that was introduced in March 2023. The bill would change local internet laws to prohibit commercial entities from distributing what it calls material harmful to minors, except with age verification. The bill proposed is badly thought out plan for censoring adult content. An amendment was proposed in April that would have changed it into an anti-transgender bill. The amendment would have broadened the definition of materials harmful to minors to include acts of transgenderism, which the amendment bizarrely defined as a person in a mental state of believing the person is transgender or transspecies. It would have banned content about transgender people from being publicly on the internet where they would be seen by people of all ages. Anyway, the state rejected the amendment. The bill passed on May 19, 2023. Still a badly designed censorship bill, but without reference to transgender or transspecies people.
This shows an excerpt from the rejected amendment, Montana Senate Bill 544.001.001, on page 4 at Section 1, Subsection 7, Subsection L. It says, transgenderism means a person being in the mental state of believing the person is transgender or transspecies. The wording of this definition is a mess because of the hateful and ignorant attitudes behind it. Calling it transgenderism is a transphobic dog whistle, which is why the sentence uses transgender to mean something else. Calling transgenderism a belief is meant to discredit its reality and misrepresent gender variance as an alternative belief system or mental illness, rather than scientifically recognized facts about human variation. Making transspecies a subcategory of transgenderism is bizarre and not standard. The bill doesn't give a definition for what it means by transspecies. What exactly would it have been used to censor? Would it have censored harmless furry content in cartoons?
Do any real people call themselves transspecies? If they do, what should they use that word? See our panel from OtherCon 2021 about these questions called The Use and Misuse of the Term Transspecies.
What happens next? How do we expect this trend to continue in the next few years? The litterbox urban legend started in the US, and now anti-furry bills have started there too. Conservatives in other nations, such as the UK, are starting to circulate the urban legend as well, and we may see it spread to more places with more bills based off of it. When laws target people for being transgender, they are not the only people who will be affected in a terrible way. We must prioritize solidarity and take action to protect one another as well as our own people. A proactive measure you can take part in is to contact your representatives. While the bills listed are only in the United States, you can still contact your representatives to give your voice. Go to local school board meetings to listen and voice your questions and concerns. Transphobes have been making things happen by doing that, even if they don't have any kids who go to the school in question. Donate to good causes and support marginalized peoples. Some reputable organizations that support LGBTQ people and their rights are GLAAD, Mermaids, Human Rights Campaign, and the National Center for Transgender Equality. or other civil rights organizations, such as the American Civil Liberties Union. Be cautious about sound-alikes that impersonate good organizations, and use Charity Navigator to check their backgrounds. Boost and donate to your friends' personal fundraisers for their health, legal expenses, and moving expenses. Donate to the social media platforms that you prefer so they can afford to keep going. Support and mutual aid means more than just sending the right money to the right places. Listen to your friends who are LGBTQ or members of other marginalized groups. Educate yourself.
Whenever a friend shares a rumor or a news article with you, see what MediaBiasFactCheck.com says about the reliability and political stance of that news source, and see what Reuters Fact Check and Snopes.com have to say about its content. See what Media Bias Fact Check has to say about the news sources that you tend to read, and see if you can discover more reliable ones and try out following those for a while. You'll be less likely to fall for misinformation about or related to transgender people if you learn the facts from good sources. For fact-checking urban legends and popular misconceptions about transgender people, we recommend the blog genderanalysis.net by Zena Jones. For keeping up with the news about Legislature like we talked about today, follow the blog Erin in the Morning by Erin Reed, which you can find at erininthemorning.com.
Educating yourself about transgender people from reliable books is a good way to protect yourself against falling for misinformation and hoaxes. We recommend the book Trans Bodies, Trans Selves, edited by Laura Erickson Schroth. Whatever you wonder about trans people, you may find the answers here. This huge, up-to-date book covers nearly every imaginable topic about transgender lives in all their diversity. Part of why it's so excellent is that it's written by trans people together with health experts. The second edition was expanded even more, and even has an essay by the Chris's about being transgender in plural. We also recommend Trans Liberation by Leslie Feinberg. It's from the 1990s, so the jargon and political concerns in this book feel dated now, but it's of more than historical interest. What's still as relevant as ever is its emphasis on solidarity between marginalized groups. Transsexuals, cross-dressers, gays, bisexuals, lesbians, people of color, the working class, all of us. No matter our differences, standing together as we fight for our rights is a matter of life or death. The book starts with Feinberg telling about having almost died because an emergency room doctor refused to treat her because he was queer. The book continues with an anthology of essays by other folks all across the gender spectrum.
An important part of media literacy is learning to recognize when information comes from sources that are promoting hatred, because hatred usually involves a lot of misinformation. Explore the Anti-Defamation League's encyclopedia of hate group symbols on their website, and we also have links to a couple Tumblr posts that have lists of dog whistles associated with hatred against transgender people. A dog whistle is the use of specific language in politics to gain support from a particular group without alerting the opposition. It's language that contains hidden meanings or ideas that may not be initially apparent if you aren't familiar with the connected politics of the group who uses it. Sometimes people may espouse dog whistle rhetoric in their activism without even realizing the implications of what they're saying.
We recommend a couple of relevant books about civil rights, especially for high schoolers. What Are My Rights? Q&A about Teens and the Law by Judge Tom Jacobs explains all about all sorts of legal rights of youth, mainly, but not only in the U.S. Girls Resist, A Guide to Activism, Leadership, and Starting a Revolution by Caitlin Rich explains about what teens can do to protect their rights in school and the rest of the world.
Thank you. Some of the graphics in this presentation come from Mutant Standard Emoji by Zook, which has a Creative Commons license. You can find them at the website mutant.tech.
So now we turn this panel to our audience. What are your thoughts on the current events?
For this section, you guys are welcome to just plop your questions in the panel chat, or if you want to make sure that the questions are read aloud and answered, you can put it in the panel questions channel on the Discord itself. I am so tired, bro. Shit sucks. I'm livid. Yeah, I think we can relate to those feelings, all of us. The US sounds more scary every year. Yeah, strong agree as someone who lives here. It is, things do get a little scary, especially as a Floridian. Things get pretty scary here. I see that gif of Bugs Bunny chopping Florida off. I'm not playing it because I'm recording, but I see it and I recognize it for what it is.
We have a question.
Go ahead.
I was gonna just say the exact same about the question.
Scar asked, do you think there may be a rise of anti-otherkin bills? It looks like something is starting, yes. We are probably going to continue to see more. And we had, Kai, didn't you say that you had seen some of the Litterbox hoax appearing in Canada and in the UK too, right?
At least Canada. I'm not certain of anywhere in the UK, but I wouldn't be surprised with some of the anti-transgender rhetoric that we've been seeing more and more there.
Okay.
Mama
and
Volta.
Lily Nykier, wait, come back. Lily Nykier asked, how did the Litterbox hoax come about even? Was it made up whole cloth, or was there something they based it on? Chimeras, I think you've got this one.
As far as I've been able to find, the closest possible origin is that a high school district actually did buy cat litter, but its purpose was actually as something for if there was a active shooter incident, as a means of like an emergency bathroom for students. So unfortunately, somehow someone heard about the high school buying cat litter and jumped to conclusions. That hasn't been necessarily confirmed that that's a possible origin, but it is something that is known to have helped perpetuate it.
And we have seen that conservatives had been making up stories about satirizing transgender student restroom access even before that happened. For example, I found stories where conservatives had made up examples of where they were just hypothetically talking about it rather than trying to claim that it had happened, of saying, well, if we allow transgender students to use restrooms that align with their gender identity, then why don't we install fire hydrants for students who identify as dogs? And it was facetious and ridiculous and, just ugh. So that's actually something that conservatives have been using to satirize transgender people for a lot longer time, before the rise of the Litterbox hoax really started to catch on.
We have questions in the panel questions chat, too.
Mama Volta asked, who deleted the passage in the law mentioning non-humans? Ryan, would you have any idea what that might have been?
Let me see here. Sorry, I was reading multiple things at once. Who deleted the passage in the law that mentioned non-humans? You could take a look at the history of the bill in question. I'm not sure which bill Mama Volta is referring to, since there were 4 of them, but you can take a look at it on Legiscan, and you can see the whole history of the changes that the bill went through and who worked on it. So Legiscan is something that we, let's see, do I have a link down here for that? Legiscan is a really useful website for looking at details about legiscan.com. You can use that to look up any current bills. You can set up notifications, so it will notify you about bills coming out that use keywords that you're concerned about. And you can use it to keep track of the development of a bill as it passes through, maybe getting approved or getting killed.
On the panel questions, Amber asked, to which extent do we understand why some people are so anti-trans, anti-kin? I mean, what is What is it that they are so afraid of? What kind of danger do they pose in their eyes? Is paranoia, or is it just a way of justification?
I did a panel on actually anti-otherkin based on my bachelor's capstone for my religious studies bachelor's. So for just TLDR of that, though I would recommend watching it. People are often anti-otherkin because they are bigoted in ways that they don't even realize they're bigoted in. A lot of it comes back to just invisible racism, ironically, around perceptions of religion, which otherkin are often confused or conflated to be, regardless of the actualities of someone's identity. In regards to why some people are anti-trans, that's something I don't think I'm equipped to answer, but I...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make the point, comment that I've read a little bit, is that possibly this is a case of there has been a rise of fascism in the United States politics in various shades, and a part of fascism is to find a scapegoat. And there has been some speculation that the attack on LGBT people, especially trans people, is a form of finding a scapegoat.
Right. And I would also say additionally that the existence of LGBT people is also a significant threat to the patriarchy. And so patriarchal movements, especially fascism, which is very patriarchal, want to maintain the power structure that assumes that there are specific inherent and unchangeable roles that men and women are supposed to hold in war and reproduction. And any exceptions or variations on that are viewed as a threat to the patriarchy and treated with a lot of hostility that seems out of proportion to the actual threat that they really pose in practical terms, which is, basically nothing generally. Since, after all, it doesn't really hurt anybody if somebody wears different clothes than they're expected to wear, or if they fall in love with somebody different than they were expected to fall in love with.
Scar in the questions panel ask, fun question, with anti-trans species becoming common in laws, has there been any uprising in furry hunters?
That'd be news to me.
I haven't heard anything.
We follow several furry-specific news sources, and as far as I'm aware from watching what they're keeping an eye on, there hasn't been any instances of people attacking furries, like, to any way that would be described as, like, furry hunting.
Oh, and Faylene brought up Matt Walsh. We actually have an article that we wrote about that that we can link to. We already handled that. Here, I'm dropping it in the panel 2 chat. There.
There is a question on the panel questions chat. Do we have a framework to unify and coordinate ourselves yet, or does this panel have suggestions?
We had suggestions for activism, but we don't have something that's centralized, if that's what you're asking about, of an actual organization. We don't currently have any nonprofit organization that works in favor of alter human rights.
Yes, there are several organizations that work with civil rights in general, but there's nothing specific for like alter humans.
Yeah, and we recommended for some for transgender rights. There is a really good organization for the rights of plural systems. What is their name again?
Are you referring to Power Plurals?
Yeah, I'm blanking on the name. I was just looking at it yesterday, but I don't have a link to them right now.
I think if we're the Plural Association.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that sounds right. Yes, thank you. There was a question by Will asking about why we think it is that a lot of the drafts were revised to no longer target non-humans but still retain the transphobia. I would say that is because the transgender people were the main target, and non-humans were just sort of an additional target that was added on. And perhaps they did remove it just because they found that that was something that could be used to undermine the practicality of the bill. Hard to say. I haven't read any discussion about why they removed those and what their own statements were for removing those, but that's the impression I get.
Contrapause asks, how can activists and civil society in non-Western countries prepare for potential talking points like this, especially since some countries have a bit of a head start when it comes to these kinds of moral panics and culture wars? For reference, in my country, the gay marriage debate became relevant as in a national debate as of late 2018. In terms of preparing for potential talking points like this to come up in your own country or home, I would kind of take a lot of what we suggested here regarding activism and see how much you can mold that to the frameworks of politics relevant to you, and how much groups in your area may already be primed to do that. Because local groups are going to be your most powerful asset for local activism, obviously. I would say that you're already doing preparation in the fact that you're aware of this risk, you know the potential consequences of these sorts of things, as is being reflected in the United States on a political and social level. That would kind of be my best sort of suggestion personally. Local outreach, keeping up to date with what you can do locally and what your options are politically for your region, and just seeing how things can go and where you would like them not to go.
There's another question in the panel questions chat, which specifically is in regards to Florida. So, do you want to take that away, Paige?
Oh, no. Where is it?
Or do you want me to?
It's at the very bottom.
No, it's at the very, very bottom.
Yes,
I wonder what your take is on Florida's future. A lot of Florida's anti-LGBT legislation, the chat's moving, ties into a lot of other bigotries that's been popularized across the state, especially anti-immigration, and a lot of it is spearheaded by the state governor. Are there any organizations in Florida fighting against the current wave of fascism? So Florida is not a lost cause by any means. I can't speak to statewide groups because I'm involved, regarding activism, I'm involved at a local county level, personally, because that's the strongest thing I can do, given where in Florida I live. I think Florida will be okay, because honestly, I think our state is nowhere near as conservative as it's portrayed to be by our governor. I'm of that opinion, having lived here for 26 years. I feel like Floridians who live here year-round generally tend to be on the more liberal side, to be honest. I feel like the politics here are often skewed by the fact that the tourism industry is the primary drive behind Florida's economy, and money inherently is going to be more conservative. And I mean, there's just so many snowbirds, so many vacation homes that are only occupied 6 months out of the year, entire suburbs of them, that kind of fuck with the whole state. For organizations in Florida fighting against the current wave of fascism, I would look locally. I hate to drive this point home, but I would look locally. I cannot tell you enough. There are people around you who are doing things. You just have to find them. If you have a local farmer's market, like in town or nearby, or any sort of public gathering like that, like fair, anything, anywhere. If you're on Nextdoor, God, I hate Nextdoor. If you're on Nextdoor and you see people planning, like, neighborhood meetups or whatever there, neighborhood get-togethers, town get-togethers, stuff like that, you just need to reach out to the people around you, and you will usually be able to find something. And if there is absolutely nothing, that's a good sign to start something, if you catch my drift. Depending on your age range, if you're I want to say, 18 to 25, especially if you're in a college town or nearby some of the colleges in Florida, there's a lot of stuff going on that is pseudo-student organizations. I say pseudo-student because a lot of them are populated largely by students, but then also by alumni to those colleges in the area, and they kind of become this evolved form of activism between students and local people. No offense to students, I just know they don't normally stay in the area after they graduate. I hope that made sense. I hope that helped. But yeah, I do think Florida will be okay. I do think we're primarily liberal. I don't think I don't think DeSantis is representative of us at all, honestly. I really, really don't.
This is a good point that someone brought up in chat. Also speak up at your, it's good to speak up at your local library board meetings, community legislature meetings, etc., etc. Oh, and as far as schools, a lot of schools, their school board meetings are public. So that's another way that you can interact with your local government. Or you can also run.
Yeah, do not underestimate the power of getting together locally. I probably can't talk too much about my local activism here. I feel like that might give away where I live. But you can do a lot, trust me. You're much more powerful together in a smaller area than you might be spread out across the whole state. Turtle asks, question, does this anti-Therian stance from government officials mean it's best not to come out about such things in public? Sounds to me like such things paint a target on us as individuals simply by saying our beliefs and who we are. And if the government tries to enforce it, who knows what people will consider lawful. It'll empower many hate groups to do awful things to the other community. The way I see it, such bigots don't deserve the right to know who I am. That's my business and a privilege for those who I know. As somebody who has been publicly otherkin since they were, 16? 17? It's been a while. I'm 26 now. I would say to use your best judgment. I would not say that this means you have to hide who you are, or you have to, if you've been public, you have to run back underneath a rock or anything like that. I would say use your best judgment. I don't think this is necessarily a reason to be afraid to be publicly alter human, unless you feel it is. Like, for me, living in Florida, I am still publicly alter human because I am an established adult living with my spouse with a support system in my polycule, who has been running public alter human events in the local area since I was in college. I haven't done any since COVID, but I was. And I've never received much hate for it. People tend to be cowards, for lack of a better word, and they'll talk big, but in my area, at least, they won't actually hurt you, once you kind of show that you won't deal with their shit. Now, this is just me. This is not everyone. I am in a very safe place in my home, and I'm very confident out there, and also I have training as, in self-defense and kickboxing. So I'm not really worried about my physical safety that much. Maybe that's not the case for you. Maybe you're like a minor at home, and your parents would react really poorly. Like, in that case, don't come out. Or maybe you're going to a super conservative college in a hyper conservative town, and it's like, you already can't talk about being queer. Like, then in that case, don't probably. It probably would put you at risk or make your life a lot harder. But I would not let this be the deciding, it's not a strict binary of yes or no that I'm gonna give you an answer to. Think hard about your situation, and if you don't want to, talk about it publicly because of this, that's your choice to make. But if you don't want to let this stop you, that's also your choice to make.
Another thing to consider is you don't have to always be completely open everywhere. You can be very, very open among your friends. You can be open at your work. You can be open or not at school, etc., etc. So you can kind of you can choose where to kind of be open and not, but you still have to worry about one group talking to another group.
What is the panel's opinion on respectability, politics, and the intersection of different communities? This is relevant because, for example, I've spoken to the vamp community, and ad nauseum, many spaces are avoidant of us out of fear of being pulled into the hostility. I think respectability politics should be shoved into a dumpster and lit on fire, personally. Not speaking on behalf of my partner system and my boyfriend, but that's what I think.
Yeah, our opinion of respectability politics is its opinion can be best described as if you're trying to appease the people that are oppressing you, then you're not actually helping yourself. You always want to punch up, never punch down. Into the question... Oh, that was a different person. Never mind.
But yeah, it's respectability politics aren't where it's at. Solidarity is where it's at.
You will never make conservatives happy.
Yeah. Also, Orion, you're muted. I just want to make sure you know. In case you've been trying to talk.
Yes, I know. Thanks for checking in.
And just to warn everyone, we have about 5 minutes left, so we'll need to be wrapping up this panel relatively quickly.
Yeah. If you have any more questions, please drop them in panel questions, and we'll try to get them as we're able to. And if this panel was really rough for you, consider coming to my comedy panel in 1 hour. As a little bit of a, a lighter thing. I see people typing in panel questions as fast as their animal and non-human hands can type. Go, Alter Humans, go. You are so brave for doing 2 panels in a row. I know, Goratrix, thank you. It's not right after this. I have an hour in between. But thank you.
I'm just scrolling into the chat looking for any important questions that people had.
Does the panel have suggestions on ways to come together between the communities for constructive activism and bonding again? Yes, I do! I do have suggestions for that. I do have suggestions for that. My suggestions for that are talking about, actively talking about inclusivity, using inclusive language, when you're setting up events. Actually, yeah, setting up events and community gathers like this is one of the biggest things I feel like we can do for intra-community bonding. Reaching out across those, like, fences and gates that people have put up and being like, no, I'm not going to accept that. Building bridges instead of walls. A very excitable Page. I have a lot of feelings about this, okay? This is this is why I made like the non-human national park forum, and like this is part of why I'm doing the "You Are Not a Museum" piece panel in an hour. We can build those bridges. You absolutely can, and I would say that a lot of the community is already doing fantastic work to do so. Really, all you need to do is reach out to people. Reach out that paw or that hand or that claw or whatever, and just start building things together. And that will form those bonds. It's not any more complicated than that, I promise. Also, I'm so glad people are appreciating that my boyfriend's voice is amazing, because, yeah, Orion sounds amazing.
Orion, you don't have any response?
No comment.
No, I'm just quietly blushing.
Aww. Yeah, and learning from the folks who've been organizing for decades before you. You're totally right. That is a great comment and a great point. Like, put yourself out there.
And, yeah, that's exactly why I was pointing to Leslie Feinberg's book, which does talk about the kind of work that people were doing together. Other Dasky.
Yeah.
No.
You should do it.
That's so off topic, but yeah, that would be funny, I guess. Completely off topic for this panel. Total tone change.
Sorry.
No.
Talk about exploding key shifters.
But yeah, I recommend all of Feinberg's books. They're often very heavy to read, about pretty bad things happening, but also about a lot of very inspiring times of how people have been very brave and worked together. So yeah, highly recommended. Just very, yeah, I have a lot of feelings about Leslie Feinberg's books.
We have one last question. Are there suggestions in navigating IRL queer spaces as a non-human? Yes! I found that, honestly, it's not a huge problem. It's really not as much of a problem as you'd, like, originally assume in my experience. Your mileage may vary, but I was part of my college's ECQSA and its trans safe space, and I was an officer for both for 4 years. And generally, you will find, as long as it's a good place, quite a bit of solidarity and quite a bit of understanding there, especially if you use a queer framework a little bit to explain things and you've already like solidified your presence in a queer space, in an IRL queer space, so you're known, you're trusted, these guys are your friends, you know. There's not really going to be any reason to like flip out and be like, what, you know. It's, yeah, be yourself, kind of test the waters, but like don't be afraid. That'd be my advice from my experiences. Okay, we have 1 minute. Any last comments, guys? Any last comments?
We'd like to thank everyone for coming to our panel, and we hope that this panel was both entertaining and very educational.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Come to my panel in an hour. You can't see it because I'm not camera sharing, but I'm doing a little heart with my hands at all of you.